Hello everyone, it's Mario Kostik from Prianto, and we are here for the webinar about combined forces for AD security. We have here Dan from One Identity, Dan Conrad, and as I know from the attendees list, we are getting a bit up to the point when we will start, but I would propose to wait a couple of minutes, like 1-2 minutes, to have some more attendees here for the late joiners also to wait a bit, and then we will start. So stay tuned up to the point, and in a couple of minutes we will start. So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining for our webinar, Combined Forces for AD Security. And let me just give a brief summary of some couple of words about who we are and what we do. We as Prianto, and I'm on my side, I'm sales manager at Prianto, Mario Kostik, and we are working very tightly together with One Identity. One Identity is one of our core cybersecurity solution provider, actually, within our portfolio. So I'm really looking forward to share this webinar with you. What we will be talking about, or actually Dan will be talking about, I'm more of a listening part, or I'm taking more of the part of participation and not providing here much of an information, because Dan will be the one who is actually here and can give you some really good information on this topic. So what the webinar will be about, it's about security, it's about privileged account management, it's about user life cycle management, and of course auditing of these users and how we can combine these different topics into one gathering of solutions. So about Dan, some words. Dan is working at One Identity as an IAM strategist, and he holds many certification from Security Python. I do not want to list it, but you can see it already there at the presentation what he's sharing. So basically, he would be really the person who could give you the information what would be needed here. And if you are looking forward to get more information on user lifecycle management, on AD security, then you are at the right place and of course at the right time. So let me hand over the word to Dan. And after this presentation, of course, you will have the possibility to answer your questions. If you want, you can write the questions what you have in the meantime into the chat box. There's also possibility to write in questions, but at the end, if you want, you can also ask these questions directly from Dan.
Great, thanks, Mario. Thanks for joining us today. So today I'm going to walk you through some concepts and some solutions and sort of why these work together and why they actually exist. So just a brief agenda. I'm going to address several topics around security, but focused on Active Directory in particular. I'm going to talk about privileged access management as it relates to AD and compare that to native delegation. A lot of what we do in Active Directory, we've done natively, and I say now that Active Directory is in place, we have the ability to do a lot of that. And I date myself because I'm going back to the year 2000 when Active Directory first came into fruition. But we're going to look at some of what came in native Active Directory, why it was there, and then talk about the rest of how that relates to the solutions in this portfolio and why they exist. The auditing of Active Directory and the pieces that go with that. And then hopefully I'm going to get a little bit of time here to possibly demo some things for you and show you what it would look like when you use it in a real world scenario. I've used this presentation before, and I've sort of built this based on one of the concepts that has been around, in the trade shows and in, coming in the government putting out things like zero trust, the concept of zero trust. And when I started looking at some of the research around zero trust that went back to, I think, about 2010, some of the definitions that came out around the concept of zero trust really looked like it was anti-Active Directory. So I started thinking about that, and I was looking at some of the exploits against Active Directory, and it put together in my head that Active Directory at its core is a single sign-on solution designed to make the life of the user easier. When you come in the morning, you can authenticate one time, theoretically have access to anything in the environment that you would need. And part of what makes that work is things like NTLM hashes in Active Directory, getting under the covers a little bit and looking at those NTLM hashes. So if you're not familiar with an NTLM hash, what happens when you log on to a workstation or a server or anything in a Windows environment? And when I say log on, I mean sit down, log on interactively, or remote in and log on that way, not connect to network shares and things. But when you log on interactively, you generate an NTLM hash. And in some of the demos I've done, what I like to do is make passwords the same so that I can show you that the hashes are the same, so that I don't really need to reverse engineer a hash to figure out what the password is if I can simply just pass this hash off and use it as a password instead. It works perfectly. There's a lot of exploits out that do that, things like Mimikatz, and those lead to other exploits. But this NTLM hash is what makes the user experience possible. So that dates back to the Windows NT days. So that when I connect to shares and I connect to other servers in the environment, or I connect to SharePoint, that sort of thing, these NTLM hashes are passed and I don't have to worry about being prompted for logon. That's the core of what Active Directory does provide from a single sign-on solution perspective. Now, it is possible to turn off NTLM in your environment. However, there's so many applications in the environment, even security applications that monitor the environment that are dependent on NTLM hashes. It's very difficult to do in an existing environment. You may be able to do that in a, if you were to stand up a new Active Directory, you may be able to turn off NTLM and not allow it in your environment. But you're going to be very restricted on what you can actually do in that environment. We do have customers that have done that and have had some success with that. What I like to do in the world of administration, particularly NTLM hashes are vulnerable when dealing with privileged accounts. For instance, your domain admin accounts, your enterprise admin accounts, anything that would grant permissions to things beyond what a regular user would do. Those are going to be subject to attack by outside forces. So we'll call them, the attackers in this case. So if I'm trying to get into an environment, I'm going to look for hashes. And if I have a domain admin account and I log on to a server or a workstation and I do my work and then I log off and I leave, that NTLM hash stays in residual memory on that machine. Therefore, someone can use an exploit to reach into memory and pick up that residual hash and pass it off as themselves. So I don't need to reverse engineer it for a password because I already own it. In reality, if I wanted to, I can use that hash to reset the password of this account, and so that the person that used it doesn't know what it is anymore. That should set off some red flags. But in the world of privileged access management, we want to control this NTLM hash. So the way I like to consider it is I'm going to vault the credential. So, and me as an administrator, anytime I need to use a credential, whether it's my own credential or a shared credential or, a service account password or something like that, I'm going to reach into the vault and pick that up. So when I reach into the vault and I get it, I'm going to be able to retrieve the current password and be able to use it just like I would. Hopefully you would get to the point where you don't want to see passwords anymore and say, I just need to be logged on to, admin server number 2 as a domain admin and just pass me off through a session and I don't have to see a password. So when I'm done using that credential, I simply check it back into the PAM solution. When I check it back in, it's going to change the passwords, which I call it spoiling the hash. When I cycle the password to an unknown value, the hash gets basically destroyed. So if someone were to log on to one of those systems where I left a residual hash in memory, the concept of using that hash is pretty much out the window. Additionally, these PAM solutions, like the one I'm going to show you in a few minutes, are going to do things like disable the account. Disabling the account, of course, also ruins the hash or prevents it from being used, but there's other things that go along with that. You get into other types of exploits where the account being enabled or disabled makes a lot of difference. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to do what's called just-in-time provisioning. So instead of me connecting to the vault and checking out a permanently privileged domain admin account, I'm going to check out basically a useless account. When I check it out, that account's going to be populated into the domain admins group and enabled, and then I'm going to receive the password. Then when I'm done with it, I'm going to check it back in. And there's a lot of tools in place that are locking this down and ensuring that it goes the way that I want it to. So there's 3 solutions working in place to make this happen. First off is a tool known as active roles. Most of our larger environments across the world that have large active directories, say 5,000 users plus, have active roles in place because it gives them a delegation model for Active Directory that far surpasses what they're capable of doing in native tools. This gives them the ability to remove native permissions in AD, and they don't have to worry about it being compromised through the native permissions model. And then active roles will proxy and evaluate and dynamically manipulate those permissions to meet the needs of the larger enterprises. This solution works with Safeguard for Privileged Passwords, which in this case is my password vault. This password vault is a place to put things like all the credentials I would need, privileged credentials to use on a daily basis. It's not for day-to-day user use where a user would come in the morning. It doesn't work that way. The regular user accounts can operate on their own, doing their own thing the same way they've always done. But when you talk privileged passwords for privileged accounts, we want to treat those quite a bit differently. So Safeguard itself will check the passwords in, spoil the NTLM hashes, change the passwords on a regular interval. The question comes up, how often should I change passwords? Well, with Safeguard, it really doesn't matter. Do it as frequently as possible, make the passwords a moving target. In my lab environment, I literally change passwords every 4 hours on all accounts that are managed because it doesn't matter. It's no overhead on me, it's no overhead on the system to change the passwords every 4 hours. It basically turns them into single-time use. In larger real enterprise environments that aren't playing around in a lab, you might want to consider a once a week is fine for you. And then it gives you full reporting on how often those passwords were changed so that you don't have to actually change it, write it down, and log when it was actually changed. In Active Directory, you've always got an attribute that you can look at as well. It also is going to do things like disable the accounts when they're not in use. It's going to talk to active roles as well. So active roles is going to be listening to Safeguard to say, which accounts have been checked out, which accounts are in use right now. When I reach in and I check out one of these managed accounts, it'll tell active roles the account is now been checked out and is available for use, take action. And based on that, active roles can do a lot of different things on that. In the scenario I'm going to show you, Active roles is going to populate the group membership for me based on some functionality in active roles known as dynamic groups and virtual attributes. But it can also do other things like reach out across the network and provision to Azure or whatever you need to do. Some of the scenarios I've worked with where I would check a credential out of a safeguard and I would need to be added to the Azure Global Admin Group, or the role actually. And that can be done through active roles because it has an engine in there that you can make it do just about anything you want it to do. So when we're talking about group memberships, Change Auditor comes into play. Of course, Change Auditor, under the covers, is auditing all the changes that happen to Active Directory. It's doing it through an agent that sits on a domain controller, and it's just watching everything that happens, recording it, and sending it off to a database. I can take action on some of those. I can send them off as alerts. That's what it does at its core. But it has a great piece of functionality under the covers called object and attribute locking. So if I wanted to, for instance, lock the name attribute on a user, the first name attribute, you can do that, so that it can't be changed, regardless of the permissions level of the person. So if I'm the domain admin, I literally have permissions to touch everything. Well, not if Change Auditor is in play. So I could take, theoretically, I could check out a domain admin account and then go add other people to the domain admins group. Not so when Change Auditor is in play. Change Auditor will stop that action and make it look like a permissions issue from a domain admin, and then it'll also send an alert off to the system. So these three working together lock that environment down for me so that I can do all this at one shot. Here's what it looks like from an architecture perspective. So let me grab a pen here. So in this environment, the typical Windows administration is going to do things. They need to administer Active Directory. So if they need to administer Active Directory, they simply connect to Active Roles. Active Roles evaluates the permission and then passes off the actions to Active Directory. So what's actually happening here is Active Roles is making the changes to Active Directory on behalf of the person, the administrator, making the requested changes. So Change Auditor, when it's auditing Active Directory, will see that Active Roles made the change. But we integrate those two. It'll say that Active Roles made the change on behalf of the Windows admin. It'll have a name tied to it, the full who, what, when, where of the auditing process. So if a Windows admin needs to, say, administer they say maybe they needed a domain admin password to install a patch on domain controllers. In this case, the Windows admin himself as a person wouldn't necessarily have that credential, but they would have the ability or have the rights to check out a credential. So they would connect to Safeguard in that case. When Safeguard approves the checkout, there's approval workflows. So maybe the security department needs to approve this certain type of permission or the certain type of checkout at certain times. Once it's approved and checked out, Active Roles, the just-in-time service of Active Roles, will catch that change and give them the permission to do that. And then they're able to log on to that Windows platform out here using that credential. The session management piece can come in as well, where you can connect to Safeguard and say, yes, you can have a domain admin credential. You can only use it on server 1 during this time, and you can only have a session. We're not going to show you what the password is. And when you get that session, we're going to audit and record that. This works the same way for Unix admins. In my environment, I've got my Unix environment joined to Active Directory using another one identity solution. So if I wanted to administer this Unix environment out here, I can simply connect to Safeguard. And instead of requesting the root password or some account out here on the Unix platform, I'm going to request an Active Directory credential. And the same process is going to happen for that Unix, and it's going to give me rights on that Unix platform. But this can work for other admins as well. So if you're just, if you need to an application security admin or a server admin or whatever the roles are in your environment, any of those credentials can be vaulted in Safeguard. And this includes service accounts. So service accounts would be vaulted in Safeguard, but you wouldn't necessarily audit them, or you wouldn't necessarily allow them to be checked out the way you would a regular credential, if that makes sense. Best case scenario, service accounts are never used to log on interactively. They just shouldn't be that way. But then you can still change the passwords on service accounts, and Safeguard will reach out and touch where those service accounts are running and update the credentials, so when the service restarts, it'll still work for you. So this is the just-in-time discussion. So just-in-time is sort of a phrase that we made up, and we invented the term. So we call it active roles just-in-time provisioning for safeguard. So if you look at two solutions working together, active roles and safeguard, you have what's in between them is the just-in-time service. This is a service installed on a Windows platform that listens to safeguard and talks to active roles and vice versa. So when the account is checked out of safeguard, active roles just-in-time service will tell active roles that it's been checked out, and active roles can take actions. In this case, I play with the domain admins group, or I play with a group that's nested in the domain admins group and move that way. Our goal here is to, I say eliminate attacks. Well, it's not necessarily a complete elimination. And in the world of cybersecurity, you never want to say eliminate or, from across the board. There's always a way that somebody could get around something. But in this case, we're significantly reducing the attack surface of these privileged accounts, where the only time they would be vulnerable to something like the pass the hash attack would be when they're actually in use. So if I have a 15-minute window to install something and I get on and get back off, then I really don't have to worry after the fact that the residual hashes stored in memory on that machine are still vulnerable, because the account is going to be disabled, the password's going to be changed, which spoils the cache. And on top of that, the account, even if you were to enable it and check out the password, it's not a member of any privileged group, so it literally can't even do the same actions that I just did on the same machine that I just did them. So that's our goal, is to nearly eliminate pass the hash and other 80 privilege attacks. So let me show you what this looks like in production here, if I can just kind of jump over to my lab for a second. So I'm on a Windows 10 machine. I'm logged in. The interface I have on the left is active roles. It's a console concept. So I can look at that from a console, or I can look at it from a web UI. The way I operate my Active Directory environment, the user I'm logged in as doesn't have any rights or permissions in Active Directory. I can't enable accounts. I can't do anything to it. I can simply see things. In this environment, I have the right to check out a privileged credential. So if I needed to be a domain admin for the next 3 hours, I can come in and I can check out one of these temporary domain admin accounts. I label them as I do, such as they're in an OU, tagged as privileged users. And then I've got the SG on there for safeguard, and then I call them temp dom admin, so temporary domain admin. The account itself isn't in any privileged groups. And in fact, I don't even have the rights to see the groups that it's in, because they're just not there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect via browser to the safeguard interface, and I'm going to check out one of these credentials. So this is the safeguard vault, safeguard for privileged passwords. So enter my username. So let me just say right here that if you have a PAM solution and you haven't enabled multi-factor on your PAM solution, I can say that you're doing it wrong. So now I'm going to be prompted on my phone to validate the logon. Just say approve, and it'll pass me over. So now I'm going to go in and request, you'll pick one of these admin accounts. I'll take the SG domain admin 2. I'm going to check out one of these credentials. So I know it's in the domain. I'm going to go pick the account here, SG temp dom admin 2, right here. I'm going to check that out. Now I can fire off a workflow here where maybe my manager has to approve it. In this case, I have it set up for auto approval. So I'm going to check that out. Give it a moment here. So now it'll pop up in a second and tell me that the account has been approved for checkout. But so now I've got it out here. You can see I changed the description where it tells me that the account is checked out by safeguard. So if I look at the account now, it's now a member of the right group where I can go do my admin environment. In this environment, this group is nested in my domain admins group. But since I'm using active roles, I don't have the rights to see what group it's a member of. So it doesn't matter to me. It is in there. I know it is because I set it up. So now I can go look at that password. I could go do whatever I need to do. Go take a look at my simple password here. So here's my password right here. I can capture that. I can copy it to my clipboard and go use it just like I would if it were my own password. Then when I'm using it, I can do everything that I needed to do before. I can put this on Notepad, put it on my clipboard, use it just like I would. When I'm done with it, I'm simply going to reverse the process. So what's happening in the background is all of this is going on, and Change Auditor is catching all of this for me. So if I jump over into Change Auditor, I can see what's happening. Here's the member being added to the group right here. Let me blow this up just a little bit. So I can see that the SG Temp DOM Admin 2 down here has been added to the SG Temp DOM Admins as a direct member. And, member of, and then here it's telling me that it's been added to a critical enterprise group. So it's, added via nesting to the domain admins group. Down here, I can see where it was initially enabled. Here's where I actually tagged the description attribute to put that in there. So Change Auditor is catching all of these actions in real time for me. Additionally, if I wanted to jump over to a machine, let me go over here where I am a domain admin. So I'm logged in as a domain admin over here. Let me get some of these out of the way. And if I wanted to open up Active Directory users and computers and say just add somebody to this domain admin group or add somebody to one of these special groups, I can't really do that. So let me come over to one of the groups that they were in. And I'll take this temp DOM admins group and I'll try to add somebody. Now I'm logged in as a domain admin. I have the rights to do everything I want to do here. We'll go to the members attribute and add somebody to that. So we'll add my regular user account to that. Check. There we go. And as soon as I hit apply, I'm going to get an error. This is because Change Auditor has blocked this permission. The only way I can do this is through the workflow engine that I've generated between Safeguard and Active Roles. When you create protection templates around these groups, you can put exceptions in place. And the only exception I have in place here is the ability for Active Roles to actually do that. So I've protected that. Now when I come over to Change Auditor and look again, a minute here, I'm going to see an alert. There it is right there. So you can see member added to group right here, where D. Conrad was added to the temp DOM admins group. And here's who did it, ADM Dan. But you can see the little down arrow right here with the red, that it was actually protected and didn't happen. This is something you might want to turn into an alert in Change Auditor so that you know when people are trying to get around the protections that you've put in place. So now when I'm using this, I can go back and I can check it all back in. I've done my administration. I've done what I need to do. I can check it back in and it reverses the process. So if I come back over here and refresh, it's simply going to strip the group membership for me, change the attribute, the description attribute back, and disable the account. You can tell by the big red X. So the account's disabled and I come back to Safeguard. Then I give it a minute. I talk for a minute while this is happening. I can come back over into Change Auditor and I can see that the account was disabled. The member was removed from the group. Down here, the password was changed as soon as it's checked in. That spoils that NTLM hash for me, so I don't have to worry about residual credentials being left on the system. Let me come back over here. So this is what I was talking about, the ability to walk through this in real time, check out a credential from Safeguard, have Active Roles take action on it. If I'm going to administer Active Roles or Active Directory day to day, I simply use Active Roles to do that. I can do that from the MMC that I just showed, but it's even better when you have a web UI. For instance, I was speaking to one of our customers last week that has about 400 Active Directory domains with no trust relationships, and they're obviously having trouble administering these. So what took the place for them was Active Roles with the web interface. So if they need to find a user account in 400 Active Directories, they can simply search for it in the web UI and it'll find it for them, and they'd be able to perform all of those administrative actions based on what Active Roles has in place, as opposed to bouncing through native permissions and Active Directory user computers across 400 domains. It's simply impossible for them to do that. And then I can do the same thing from a Unix administration side, because in this environment, I've joined my Unix admins to Active Directory, and I can control who logs onto those Unix platforms based on Active Directory group memberships. So you need to be in a Unix admins group or a temp Unix admins group to log onto a Unix platform. That covers it for me, and it gives me that ability to audit what happens in that group. It lets me audit Unix attributes in Active Directory, and it gives me the right people, the right permissions to log onto Unix platform at the right time. The at the right time part of that phrase adds really to that least privilege model that we've always tried to put in place, where people have just the right permissions to do just enough, but now we can add a time factor to that, so they can only do it at certain times or upon approval. So these are the solutions that are in place here. So I've talked to you about Active Roles. So Active Roles is a big piece of this. So Active Roles is the engine that's driving all of that. I've shown you the password vault, the safeguard for privileged passwords. What I didn't talk about was safeguard for privileged sessions too much. So safeguard in there, instead of me launching a password or grabbing a password and going out to one of those platforms, it simply grants me a session. So it proxies that session for me. And when I proxy that session, it gives me the capability to audit. It gives me the capability to run behavior analytics, all of that on that session. And then, of course, Change Auditor for Active Directory, which is the leading Active Directory auditing solution in the space. That gives me the complete tie-up of everything that happens in this environment, from a who, what, when, where, and sometimes even why auditing mechanism, but at the same time, the availability for object and attribute locking. I've talked to you about Change Auditor for Active Directory specifically. There are many Change Auditor modules that simply plug into this, like Change Auditor for Windows File, Change Auditor for NetApp, Change Auditor for EMC. In this environment, I actually have Change Auditor for logon activity running, so I can watch my users logging on and off different systems and track them across the map. And then all of that data ties back to a database that I can use for really whatever I need it to do. So I think we'd like to open up for questions here. If anybody has anything, I can't tell by exactly if there's anything being typed into the block here. Let me take a quick look. Mario, are you seeing anything typed in question-wise?
This question, no, I cannot see.
Okay.
So
okay.
If anyone has anything, then it's the time to right now ask it. So we are listening, or you can type it into the chat box or raise it as a question. It is up to you.
And I do have some links here if you'd if you prefer shorter versions of any. I know you can't really screenshot this link, but and I do have my LinkedIn profile here up, so send me a connection on LinkedIn. I'd be glad to answer any of the questions directly on LinkedIn, or send me an email directly, or Mario as well.
Maybe then people are a bit frightened because you took them down the rabbit hole really deep.
Well, I end up doing that, and our marketing department doesn't usually appreciate when I do that. But I think the people that I talk to are in a rabbit hole anyway, so I like to meet them in their rabbit hole.
Exactly, that's what I wanted to say. That for the people who are listening, this would be the actual format, or maybe to be saying it correctly, to go that deep technical, to have that level of understanding. So it was very good, the presentation. Very thank you, Dan, for doing it. And let's say it again, to taking us down this rabbit hole. And for the participant, as you heard from Dan, you can reach out to him also directly if you would like to raise some questions. However, we can also connect you with the dots, basically on commercial side and from technical side from Prianto. So on active roles, safeguard or change auditor, if you have any kind of questions, requirements, then we are more than happy and open to answer them. Anyhow, after the webinar, we will send out some informations, and also, of course, the recording of this session. So you will be able to revisit and to have some kind of reconnection on what you heard here. If you would like to, you can do it. And basically, I would say that's it all then, or if you would like to add something.
If you'd like to reach out to me directly, that's fine. I do have on the One Identity YouTube channel some similar presentations and recordings in maybe a 2-minute or a 20-minute format, if you would like to see that as well. Some that get right to the point and some that go even deeper. So feel free to reach out to me if you would like any of those.
Okay, thank you very much for the attendees, and thank you very much then for the presentation. And then I would say I wish you a very happy small Friday for this afternoon and Thursday.
Thank you, Mario.
So thank you very much. Bye.